Oh, that is easier. Well, we wanted to start by thinking about how our lives work and how our relationships work, in our because the title is. Does anyone have the title?
It's Resilient Relationships, something about marriage.
Here, it's resilient relationships, can marriages really recover?
Yeah.
Did you hear that? Yeah.
And I think Brett's summation from the larger session we were just in says it all very well about this hope for everybody and this hope for change, because, well, that's what we want to discuss and talk about. So you will have heard a lot about how we work. And one of the things that we thought we might focus in a little bit further in, discuss a little bit in more detail, is the fact that there's a moment-to-moment nature to our nature, and a moment-to-moment nature to life. And we, as we were brainstorming about the session, it occurred to us that there was something written in our implications that we wanted to stay, and then we could as kind of an introduction. All right, so that is, and I'll read this. There's one specific place in time we can experience thinking, creating, feeling. It's not in the past or the future. This only exists in the present moment. And we'd like to connect that to relationships, how they work, and how we're all, it's possible that for any of us to have a fresh start and to think again and to find a new ground to navigate our relationships with our children, our marriages. We can focus in on marriages, but this possibility of that specific place wherein you can see this connection between your feeling and your thinking is always there for you anytime you look, anytime you stop and really notice or sense or comprehend. That present moment is always there for you, and it's therein. There's once you can see something there. There's something really valuable to comprehend and to see, and when you see that, that plays out and has a lot to do with how you will navigate and exist and be in your relationships. So these things, we would say that one of the things that happens for us is that there's a lot of things that get taken off our mind when we understand how our minds work. And these irrelevancies or these reactions or these judgments, these confusions, these experiences we have, doubt or fear or judgment, it all is abated or taken away or eliminated in the present moment. And in the present moment, your head clears of those pathologies, and it's therein that you can see where to go next in your conduct and in your relationships with people?
Yeah, I would say that pre-principles, as I shared yesterday, I would go on long meditation retreats to try to get my head clear, and I'd get deeply in the present, and I'd notice what a tremendously beneficial impact that had on my relationships. They were just on a completely different level. I could connect with people easily, communication flowed, and then I was back in my own thinking and relationships became complicated, and I was mystified by that. And when I was introduced to the principles, it got better. I was in the present more often, I had more connection with people, but then I would be lost, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, sometimes longer. That mental noise kept me from connecting with people. When I learned this paradigmatically, these implications to me are very profound. You might notice that while Keith was reading that, my head was bowed, and I realized that it brings deep spiritual truth. And what I remember from that implication is there's only one place and time where we know that we're feeling our thinking in the moment, and that is the present. And then what I don't think you said is it's as if we finally have a reason to be here. Now that to me is very deep and very touching. When I first read that, it was like I experienced this calming inside, because I realized that the whole 9 yards of presence is built into the fact of realizing our feeling in the moment, that we're feeling our thinking. In other words, that we've been gifted with that entire landscape of the present simply through understanding that. It finally gives us a reason to be here. And this, in our experience, is the foundation for good relationships. You know, I began to notice as my mind got calmer, it's calming itself more, that people were just drawn to me. You know, children immediately will come to me, or striking up relationships with adults is so much easier. You're like a magnet in the present. And when your mind is stressed and busy and full of your personal thinking, you're a little bit more, people feel that. And it's more of a repellent. And when you try to interact with someone whose mind is filled with personal thinking, it's a very, you enter very choppy seas, because it's difficult for somebody to connect with you. What they're connecting with is their own thinking. And it can make for very challenging relationships, and it can make for very lonely relationships. When you're trying to connect with someone and you keep noticing that what they come back with is not what you were saying.
When I was a kid, we would go to dinner. Chapman's restaurant was on Washington Street in Indianapolis, and occasionally we'd go there and have dinner, and they had a little gift shop, and you could buy these little trinkets and such, and they had these magnets that when you said repellent, I thought it was like that. When you try to push these two magnets together, you couldn't get them together. There's just no way. You try, and then they would just dart off. They were polar opposite. You know what I mean? Those little things. But if you flip it around, they just click on and just type. And there's a sense about that, about how I am with people and how I connect with people. And furthermore, how I connect with God. Like it's that too. It's this connection of our lives with our spiritual nature, the spiritual nature of our lives, the spiritual nature of our relationships. It's provided for and kept non-repellent, but connecting, that you really get a chance to deepen and enjoy and have a more a closer connection to God through this through how your mind works. Your mind is potentiated with that capacity, and that's why it's there for everybody all the time. But I had no idea how my thinking played into that. I thought I just didn't understand, and how the present moment played into that. I didn't understand that it was. I thought it was. There were other means. There were other avenues. There were other practices or other methods or techniques that were involved with getting that to be there for me, and I didn't know. So it was very spotty and very inefficient. So I thought it was through a good communication or a good a romance or a feeling of being in love. But all these things, just like Annika was saying, they would wax and wane. You know, they could be there and then they could thin and disappear. And how do you get that back? So when we work with people, we work with couples, knowing how the nature of this, of the spontaneity of this, of the realization of it, the potential of it, as not being, we don't have to. Before, what I would do is I might have couples face one another and tell each other what was wrong with each other, for example, or you know, to kind of unload, get things off your chest, what have you. And it might even sometimes kind of work, be a sort of a tearful moment of honesty. And you would see people let their guard down, but there was nothing that would endure or sustain or become clear to each individual in the relationship that would help them on an ongoing basis. When I saw how this worked via thought, it just narrowed it down and simplified it. It made it much more practical and possible, and something I could talk endlessly about. You know, you could describe it. It gave a focus rather than it being what you have to quit doing that, or you should start doing this, or buy flowers, or go on vacations together, or what have you. All those things that people would prescribe, or that I would prescribe, fell away, and I began to, because I was kind of watching it. I could see what it was that allowed for this connection, and then I would notice it in my sessions with people that they would, their heads would clear, and when someone's head's clear, their countenance changes, their eyes change, their faces change, their demeanor changes, that you can see when someone's more present and when they're more here rather than in their thinking. And they, if they can navigate that, they can see how that works. It provides a target for them too. Like they get, then that endures when they go home. Because it doesn't matter how far away from it you get. All that matters is do you know the way home? Can you see what's involved with finding that connection again? You don't have to be afraid of losing it because it's always you're only one thought away from it, and that's a hope too, isn't it? That's a real hope. You could rekindle and you could find again what you're looking for with your relationship with God and your relationship with people, relationship with your loved ones and family. Someone told me a really interesting thing yesterday that he found this with in his work. He works at a facility for dementia, and he found that the staff really loved it. So the staff, the supervisors, the caregivers, the aides, everyone loved it. And then he realized, oh my goodness, even the people with dementia work the same way. They're no different. And I didn't say this to him, but I found this once. I worked in a facility with mental retardation. The clients were profoundly retarded, but it was the same. They worked the same, and there were certain people there that were they were just so present, and they were so effective with their connection with staff, but also with the residents. And so he found that same thing, that the psychology of life was alive and well in him when he could see it moment to moment to moment to moment. That's the way it would appear, and that's the way it would fade away. It shows itself and it fades away as you understand how this works. You're going to start to have more time and more occasion for being in the present moment. You cannot help but, because you found an answer that you know is true for you, and someone else didn't convince you of it. It proves itself. It reinforces itself to you.
So I'd like to tell a little story about a couple that I was working with recently. They were fairly recently married, within a few years. They had had a baby. They were older parents, which I could relate to because I was older when I had my daughter. And they were completely estranged. So they'd only been married for 2 or 3 years. Their baby was now 2 when they started with me, and the husband had moved out of the bedroom because the wife had the baby in the bed for the first, year or so. He didn't like that, but it was also the baby was waking him up at night, and so he moved out of the bedroom. But now it had been 6 months, and the baby was in her own room, maybe even 9 months, and this fellow was sleeping in the living room. And he had a lot of complaints about his wife. They both worked full-time, challenging jobs. And basically his complaints were that she didn't, first baby syndrome, he wasn't adjusting well. She didn't give him enough attention. All of the baby came first. he didn't feel loved. Now, the wife, I'll call her Sue, you know, she moved the baby out of the bedroom. She'd little by little been, you know, adjusting to this new, very challenging job. She had a little time left over. She'd make him dinner. But he would come home, and the thought habits that had started running just kept running. So he was experiencing his thinking, which was, I was thrown out of the bedroom. Well, it had been 6 months since he'd been invited back. My wife, you know, baby's always first. So because of this thinking, he was experiencing his thinking. He wasn't experiencing the invitations that were being made, the love that was being offered. I was concerned. I'm not often too concerned about couples when they come to me because we just see one miracle after another. I was concerned about this couple. There was no connection, and they were so recently married. And it took 3 or 4 sessions for this guy, call him Joe, maybe 5 or 6 sessions, which is kind of a lot, for it to begin to, for the truth of what we offer to begin to become apparent through the cloud of this repetitive thinking, which was making him irritated and angry, you know. And it's a beautiful thing about this. These are facts that we teach. They're simple, they're understandable, and they're true. And so eventually, I would mostly offer the same thing session by session. And little by little, his defenses came down and he began to realize, oh, I could actually, well, at first it was just, you know, maybe he should accept her invitation to have a date night. And they connected and they had a good time. First time in I don't know how long. And then, he began to notice that she paid attention to their baby sometimes and paid attention to him sometimes. And so they'd have a good time. And then a lot of complaining in his head. Then they'd have a few more good times. And then after a couple of months, it occurred to him that the bedroom door was open. And he should get back together with his wife. And, this is one of the things that we see so often. Big rift here. Little by little, it's sinking in with him that he's feeling his thinking, not what's actually going on. When his mind was able to settle and land here more, when he realized he had a reason to be here, the relationship reinvented itself, and they were done. So we all know this, but we all have within us natural capacity to have relationships. We're all designed to have love and connection. When we awaken to the invisible thought walls that are separating us from people, all of that happens on its own. There isn't a whole lot that people need after that. Sometimes a little bit of help with communication, but by and large, we've got the goods inside us. You don't have to teach children how to love. They run up to you, they hug you, they love you, and we are all that, right? And so as those thought illusions get strip themselves away, we discover that we are naturals at relationships.
One of the things that I found with working with couples, by the way, was there were times when they were so at odds, or they were just, their complaints were so dominant that, this was a couple, they told me this kid story, that they said, you know, because I had them in my office and I couldn't get a word in edgewise. Like they were just complain. He would complain and then she would complain. He would complain, and I said, hey, you know, you can do this without me. You're paying me money, and I think you do this just fine at home. And they said, it's true. And then they said, you know, they said, we've got this really old dog, and the dog is just really disabled, almost disabled, and the dog would, they noticed, they came in with a story, they noticed that they would bicker. They would just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So the dog is in the living room, and the dog would kind of go, you know, like, oh. And the dog would get up, and they said the dog was so crippled that he couldn't really walk on his own, but he would lean against the wall and to get out of the room. Like I've got to get away from you people somehow, because it's just too miserable hanging out in this bickering. And then I said, I'm the same way, like, you know, like you're just no fun. You got to lighten up a little bit here. And so I had to break them apart, and I had to teach each one of them, because that was the beautiful thing about how this works, is that it doesn't take two. You know, when you think relationships, you think both have to have the same thing happening. Well, that's not really possible. Every person is a learner in their own right, and so any one person can learn. And so it's fine if the couples would come together, but it's also fine if they wouldn't, because this would help anyone. And I found that to be really, really wonderful, because it made it a lot easier. You can teach the same thing and get the same bearing and the same in-the-momentness for whichever spouse might be there. Often, not pretty commonly, it's the woman, you know, because they're just better students, I think, you know, oftentimes.
You
Not
can
always.
say that, I can't, but you can say that.
Yeah, but they just get it somehow, and but again, what they get is there's an elimination. There's something that is, there were thoughts and experiences that would get in their way. So, like when Annika was talking about that she doesn't pay attention to me. Let's just say that, okay? She doesn't pay enough attention to me. So what we would do, I mentioned yesterday, but we have this diagram that we would use, and we would, and this is a little example of it, so I'm just going to have to show you. But we've got a very big example of Rivka says she has to carry it around her big tube. I've got them here, but I don't have the stands for them. But there's this, so you see this there's a red line on there, right? And there are these little lines underneath each side. And these things, you can erase it. So I would write, I would listen to the person as they come in, and they would, because in other words, there's thoughts in the way that you're not trying to argue with them or dispute the fact that she's not paying as much attention to you as she once did. You have no, there's no issue at all with that. You don't have to try to talk him out of it, or you don't have to schedule more time for her to pay attention to him. It's, you do this for him, so you write over here, She doesn't pay as much attention to me as she used to. And then over here, on the other side, you write exactly the same thing. She doesn't pay as much attention to me as she used to. So you're not trying to talk a person out of that fact, but you're trying to show them, and people will say, wait a minute, you wrote the same thing on both sides. Shouldn't you write something better over here on the inside out? Shouldn't it be something better? I said, no, you're not trying to change what's going on. You're trying to get an insight about how you feel about what's going on, not coming from how much attention she's paying to you. Is it coming from, is that really true? Is it really true that the attention itself is the active thing that really makes you feel differently? And you start giving some examples, and pretty soon they're going like, yeah, that's not really very solid. That's sort of a flimsy idea, because sometimes she doesn't pay attention to me, and I'm attending to the baby too, and it doesn't occur to me to feel hurt or offended or neglected. So my feeling isn't really contingent on how much attention she's paying to me. It's contingent upon whether I'm thinking I'm being neglected. If I think I'm being neglected, no amount of attention she pays to me will satisfy me. And if I'm not thinking I'm feeling neglected, a little attention will be fine, or no attention is fine, because my feeling about what's going on is not being determined by these outside forces. It is 100% according to how I'm thinking. And the truth of that starts to as Svi said this morning, it starts to get in your face. That's really what's going on. That it's a spiritual experience you're having according to these principles, and it doesn't work any other way. That's the deal. And when you settle on, you start to see that that's what's the truth of it is. Well, all kinds of things begin to shake loose and happen for you that you didn't, because you were looking in. You didn't really know, but you were looking in the wrong place for the answer. This is a kind of a where to look program. Not what to do, but where to look. Where's it? Where's the action? What's the active ingredient? What really is the truth about how the human experience works for everybody? And there's a connection and a disconnection inside your own mind with your own feelings. And if that's disconnected, you're going to feel affected by things, controlled by things, reactive to things. And that's going to happen. But that's the cause. The cause of it isn't what was done or said. The cause of it is you lost your connection. Yesterday, for example, something happened to me. I had a conversation, and the person was pretty confrontational towards me. And for some reason, I got affected by it. I kept thinking about it, so I went home, and I was go to my room, and I'm grinding on this. Well, I don't know, it's kind of right. There was something kind of right about what I said. Yeah, but it was, and I had an argument with him. It's not in my room, but I have it in my head, and then I have another argument I have an argument that I lose with him, then I have another argument that I win, and then it's sort of a tie, and then I look and there's an hour's gone by, and I could be sleepy, right, or whatever, I could be relaxing, but I've got something buzzing in my head, and it went, and on it went, you know? And I tried to calm down, I tried to do all the things that, I don't know about you, but I come up with things, you know, I try, you know, maybe I'll take a walk or whatever, like you do what you do. And then for me, this is just me, but for me, at some point, this is gonna sound so simple, it's ridiculous, but at some point, it occurred to me to ask myself, am I outside in here? Honestly, am I outside in? And the honest truth of it was so obvious. Of course I am. I mean, if you're asking the question that you're outside in, the answer is inevitable. Yeah, it's a yes. Don't hedge. If you ask the question, you can bet your bottom dollar you're outside. And for some reason, when I saw that, I was over here cycling and recycling, and spinning in turmoil, and then it just popped me over here. Now, it didn't change the fact that he had these confrontational things to say. It didn't, but it took away, you know what it did, is it neutralized something that's really important for marriages to be successful, and for relationships to be successful, and for you to be successful. It neutralizes your ego. Your ego is the only problem you've got. Your ego is this idea that you have opinions, and beliefs, and judgments, and hurts, and issues, and thoughts. It's your outside-in thoughts, or your and my ego is what keeps us awakened. And when you can see a way when you get an insight that will collapse your ego and show you, oh, that's what this is. It's not what was said or done. I have no argument with what was said or done. But whether you're in an ego state about it or you're inside out, is going to tell the story. It's going to tell the story, because when I saw that, it took all the steam out of it. It took the pain out of it. It took the pain out, and I fell asleep actually. But I thought, well, I've got a great story to tell. And you'd think that, well, over time you do get better. You do get better, but it doesn't mean that you're not still, you still don't have the potential to have an ego attack, you know. But you'll get better and better, because it'll start to eliminate these big thoughts that you've had that you didn't know you were bare wires to. You didn't know that they were preying on you, and they'll get cured, and you cure it, and then now I've started to notice, like I noticed last night when I was having this turmoil. I thought, I felt this way before. You know, I felt the same sort of feelings. I felt the same sort of pain, the same sort of issues, the same sort of domination of what someone was said, and how unjustified it was, what he didn't understand, why would he say that? You know, he just didn't get, he doesn't get it. Never mind him. Well,
Yeah.
you can't get him out of your head if you're under an ego illusion about it. It's impossible. You see the neutrality of what happens, one thing, but how you now feel is according to your thinking in the moment, and oftentimes you forget that, and it looks like how you're feeling is what he said 5 hours ago, and you're in a cloud of egotism, and now sometimes people will sleep, or something will happen, the baby cries, or I don't know, you drop it, you know, but you can always go back and dig it back up again and think about it again. But it's a thinking thing that's happening to us here, it's not a physical life, it's a spiritual life via thought is the truth of it. If you get that narrowed down and start to see that's really what you're dealing with, you've really got to be consistently learning something and consistently get in better and better and better shape. You have to.
Sid used to say the ego is an image of self-importance. And he would say, run from it as fast as you can. I know when my ego gets tweaked, my mind makes up all sorts of kind of desperate implications of what I'm thinking about. And of course, because mind, thought, and consciousness work perfectly, it all looks real in the moment. More and more recently, an insight has come to me out of the blue in the middle of one of those painful thought storms that Keith was just describing, that none of this is real. And also, you have no idea. You know, like it could look like maybe somebody was offensive, and I start thinking, or, you know, oh, well, this could happen, or this, you know, they said these things in front of other people, and this, and this, and this, and then an insight has come. You have no idea what's going on here, just out of the blue. And it settled me down. I have, you know, developed tremendous faith in those thoughts that come out of the blue. And then lo and behold, I've discovered it was true, like none of it was real.
And the reality that gets sucked away is, or the unreality that gets sucked away is rooted in the untruth that your feeling isn't coming from your thinking. It's coming from what you're thinking about. It's coming from what was said, or what these other parties said. You have another source for the feeling you're feeling other than the thinking that you're thinking. So you allege, and you struggle with that, and you're going to struggle with it. We're just not that mentally healthy. As we get more mentally healthy, I think I was talking to her a couple years ago, and I said, you know, I bet you that if you come back next year, you're going to be more mentally healthy. Then I don't know if there's anybody who was here whenever I said that or not, but I could see the promise of more mental health in the attendees at this conference. Many of which are how many people have been here before? Dude, look at that, this. And Steve was telling me, you know, we've been doing work, he says, I'm doing 3 groups a week, every week. And he says, and all these people, a lot of these people have been at these groups, like there's something that's being cured. Problems are being cured and disappearing. And there's evolution at work. And that'll continue to be so because you found the nature of those issues, problems, and those feelings that are so bewildering and so disabling and so hurtful and painful. When you can see, however you come to terms with it, I use this little diagram, but however it happens for you, a little cure doesn't mean it might not recur, but it won't come back with quite the same vengeance, with quite the same sharpness or quite the same intensity. But like I used to suffer those sorts of pains. I told my wife once, I said, you know, you have no idea, but I would say you hurt my feelings probably 100 times a day. And she looked at me like, no, not 100. I said, no, I'm serious. I feel like I'm the walking wounded man. You know, like you just every little whip stitch, you're throwing a dart at me, you know. And she says, you're such a big target. And she made me laugh. But like I realized how affected. I was just so affected, not just by her, but by life. Life was just I was just at odds. Like I was just I felt like I was in a war zone. You know, little nicks and bruises. It wasn't like blood and guts. There wasn't major bleeding, but it was like, you know, it took a nick out of me. You know. And I wouldn't say that anymore. Like she doesn't really. I started to learn she doesn't have that power. What the power was coming from, how I was thinking about what she said. If she was critical, or judgmental, or reactive. What is that? You know, I started to see that my feelings weren't coming from her. They were coming from my thinking that I had about her. And it really settled me down. It returned because it was true. That's just so true. That it'll just help anybody. Because it doesn't work any other way. That you have to have thinking at play to have the feeling you're feeling in the moment, right now. And right now. And right now, and right now, and right now. It just keeps going on. So it's something you don't even have to remember it because it's just true.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
When you got more settled,
Yeah.
Velvet, did she change?
Well, you know, yes, I think, but like one thing that occurs to me when you ask that is, I think she quit being afraid. I think she quit handling me with kid gloves, so she could just be honest with me. And she figured that I was gonna be able to handle it, so I could handle it. Before, she had to like creep around on they say walking on eggshells. It was like that for her. So I got more resilient and more present. Well, so I learned where my feelings were coming from, and that really that made me easier for her. I became less of a case to deal with, so she could deal with other things, But like she had me as a problem along. I know some of you could imagine. Like sometimes people will say, "Well, I've got my kids, and then I got the big kid."
Yeah.
And the big kid, the other kid is the father or whatever. You don't realize that when your instability, you start grabbing onto things, trying to find a way to help yourself. But if you don't get at where it's really beginning, your struggles to stabilize yourself are less effective, and you're kind of grabbing onto the wrong thing. Occasionally I'll say to her, okay, look, I know I'm insecure here, but let me just throw a few things at you and see what you make of it. Like, I'd just like to hear what you're thinking. She said, okay. So she feels game, like I'm sort of ready for that adventure, and I'm not thinking that she's going to fix me or help me, but I just like to hear some other ideas. So you start to learn how to learn, and learn better how to. And again, it's just understanding you're living in a thought world. You thought you were living in New Jersey, but you're living in a thought world. And it's a spiritual world. And wow. I mean, that's a big wow. It's a big wow because it changes everything. It changes the whole story. And things open up that you didn't expect, because you had it. I had it. I thought it was a different deal. I thought you're here, you live, you die, you pay your taxes, you raise your kids, whatever, but I didn't know it was a spiritual endeavor all the way down. That's what it was. It was an old, a Native American, the thing I'm reminded of, is that this is a kind of a paradigm story. This little boy asks his father, what holds up the world? And the father says, well, it's on the back of a turtle. The turtle holds up the world. Really? Well, let me ask you another question. He says, what holds up the turtle? And the father says, it's another turtle. He says, well, what holds up that turtle? He says, son, it's just turtles all the way down. That's a paradigm story, It's just thought all the way down. It's so deep, it's so profound, it's so wonderful, it's so powerfully helpful that the universe is one divine thought. It's shocking.
Can I just mention, I'm sorry, everyone's free to stay. There is one served.
The food, yeah. I realize you've been here.
I didn't know that. No, I want to just add one thing, the reason I asked you that question. The single paradigm we all find has incredible traction And when you are looking in the direction of thought creating feeling in the moment and allowing the logic of the paradigm to reset you, it has impact on others. So if any of you are in relationships where you feel, the other person is intractable, you may find that as you continue to find yourself in this inside-out world, that not only are you have more, let's say, insulation around you, but it affects other people. And just a quick story, because a number of you come up to me after my talk yesterday and asked me, is my mother still alive? Where did that story go? She was someone who could not tolerate intimacy. So, intimacy.
Intimate.
So she would, poor kids, when we'd start to get close with her, she'd find a way to sabotage in a, not nice way. And that had gone on all of our lives, so we all had a lot of wounding around it. And about 6 months, it was about 6 months before she died that I learned these principles, it was almost 25 years ago. And I went home to see her. She had emphysema, and I would try to go home and help her out. And we'd start to get close, and then she would do her old thing of finding a way to push my buttons. And in the past, I had two strategies. I either stood there and fought with her, or I went to my room feeling comfortable. After learning this, it was like the thinking about her behavior had disappeared from my mind. So even though she had been this way my whole life, when she came at me with this meanness, I was genuinely surprised. And so I didn't stand and fight, and I didn't retreat to my room. I just looked at her like, what was that? And then when she did it again, I actually laughed because it seemed so odd. And then I went home and I thought, I'm in big trouble now because I laughed at her. When I go to see her again, when the nurse calls and says, your mother needs help, and I go to see her, she's really going to have it in for me. And when I went home that next time, my mother was standing by the door waiting for me. Wow. And she had become a completely different person. She never said a nasty thing. Instead of, begging me to come home and then spending the whole time while I was there on the phone with people, ignoring me, if people called, she'd say, I can't talk to you now, my daughter's here. She actually said to me, come and tell me about yourself. And as I talked to her, she said, you're a really nice person. She said, where did you get that? She said, you didn't get that from me. And this went on for 6 months. All the ability to be a mother downloaded in her all at once, and she became one. And this is a true story. So I want to leave you with that anything is possible. A psychologist who knew her diagnosis would say that this was not possible, but it happened. So miracles are always possible with this. So I leave you with that, and have a wonderful lunch, and we'll see you later.
Thank you very much.